The Daddy Letters Series. Season 3. Letter 61. History of Wedding Ceremonies, Part 2.
We have already discussed God's purposes for marriage, and fulfillment of romantic love is a minor part of the list. Even in civil, non-religious marriages, the goals may include romantic love, but it is well understood that marriage is a building block for society and nations. It has inherent benefits to human existence and progress. Let's waltz through a brief chronological history of the institution of marriage. For most of human history, couples were brought together for practical reasons, not because they fell in love. This romanticized version of marriage, though pleasant, does not pursue the primary function of marriage. You can expect that Adam and Eve learned to love one another after they were paired, but love did not initiate their bond. For thousands of years, love was almost considered a threat to marriage, because this could lead young people into defying their parents' attempts to arrange a good political and economic alliance with other families. The first recorded evidence of marriage ceremonies uniting one woman and one man dates from about 2350 BC in Mesopotamia. Over the next several hundred years, marriage evolved into a widespread institution embraced by the ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and Romans. In the centuries prior to the first millennium AD, marriage was a way to ensure your family's safety. Almost all marriages were arranged. By arranging for a daughter to marry an eligible man in a nearby tribe, the parents expanded the circle of people who they could rely upon in times of famine or violence. This evidences that marriage is the building block for communities, and communities are key to human health and survival. In the betrothal ceremony of ancient Greece, a father would hand over his daughter with these words, "I pledge my daughter for the purpose of producing legitimate offspring." Marriage became respected as an institution, so much so that people who didn't marry were considered outcasts. Male marital fidelity was not expected as much as it was for women, because men were intent on ensuring their wives only gave birth to their progeny. It was even considered normal for men to have romantic relationships with mistresses while they were married, but be faithful to the marriage for the purpose of raising children. There was a double standard about sex then, but that has begun falling away in today's culture, especially after the introduction of birth control pills. Today, it is common for both men and women to have multiple sexual partners before marriage, and in some new versions such as polyamory, even after marriage. It was also typical for older men to marry younger women, largely because it takes time for a man to become economically viable, and a young woman was stronger and could bear children for longer periods of the marriage. Moving to the 6th through 17th centuries, marriages continued as in previous centuries to be arranged unions, especially for purposes of aligning families with wealth, power, and status. Among the upper class, and as a means of safety and survival among the lower classes, a large family with children who could work was important for survival, especially in agrarian societies. During this period of history, the custom of negotiating a dowry and bride price came into practice. Essentially, the bride price, which confusingly was also called a dowry at times, is the price a man paid to purchase a bride from her father. The term dowry was typically applied to the wealth that a bride transferred to her husband. The dowry system had many variations around the world, but these were the basics. Dowry systems still exist in some parts of the world. The higher quality the bride, the higher the bride price, value being derived from beauty, health, breeding, political benefit, and often bloodline. In this period, the custom of placing a ring on the bride-to-be's finger to signify she was betrothed, purchased, taken, engaged, came into practice. This warded off other suitors and was equal to signing a contract. Today, engagement rings have become expensive romantic symbols, but originally it was just the way the betrothal deal was sealed. It shows how men stand ready to exploit any custom or tradition for profit, and if necessary, redefining the custom for the masses so their profit-taking is all but guaranteed. This is no less true for wedding attire, dinners, parties, and so on. It is also why couples should think soberly about what they spend for engagements, weddings, and all the surrounding customs. Don't do things because some marketing campaign says you should. Do it because it has meaning and purpose for you. During the 12th through 13th centuries is when the church began to take a more active role in controlling the institution of marriage, primarily because the union of man and woman is described in the sacred texts of most religions. Until this time, the Christian church maintained a hands-off approach to marriage ceremony. But during the 12th and the 13th centuries, the church decided it was appropriate to become involved in performing marriage ceremonies and as well authorizing who could get married according to moral guidelines. For example, churches prohibited marriage between in-laws or blood relations, as well as families who were linked by the bond of godparent and godchild. The church would often perform investigations to assure that these conditions were met. It wasn't until the 12th century that a priest would participate in a marriage ceremony, and it wasn't until 100 years later that ceremony was actually performed by clergy. Another common form of informal marriage ceremony was called common law marriage, where two people and their families simply declared the couple to be married. Essentially, they made a covenant without ceremony. For the protection of men, women, and the family, in the 13th century, legal marriage began in the church. With the custom of the church publicly announcing the intentions of a couple to marry, a practice referred to as calling of banns. By the end of the Middle Ages, written marriage contracts became a regular part of the marriage process. In the 16th century and during the Protestant Reformation, movements took place to loosen the church's grip on rules of marriage and who could perform them. They sought to make marriage a matter of civil government, owing to the fact that marriage took place between non-religious people as well as religious. However, the church obstinately insisted that true marriages required a priest and two witnesses. Sadly, during this period as before, women continued to be treated as a piece of property possessed by their husbands, and any money in their purse or land their family held was considered his. What's mine is yours is a common expression between man and wife today. In prior centuries ago, the expression only worked one way, as women gave all of their property to men. In this era, the legal dominance of the husband was ratified under a legal doctrine called coverture, under which the new bride's identity was absorbed into his, hence her taking on his last name. Whether or not specifically intended, it also communicated the divine intent of two becoming one flesh. Marriage licenses arrived in the U.S. In the colonial era, Massachusetts started recording marriages at the local level in 1639 and statewide 2 years later. This afforded protection of a couple, especially women, and afforded the state the ability to offer benefits to married couples. The idea was to encourage marriage because strong marriages were the foundation upon which strong communities were built. In the 1800s, the idea of being romantically in love with the person as a reason for marriage began taking hold, starting in England and France. No longer did the unromantic goals of alignment with a mate for practical reasons rule the thought, owing to a change in the cultural philosophies of what it means to be human that began taking hold. However, in the 1800s, women were still required to pass ownership of their property and income over to her husband. But women did enjoy the greater satisfaction of giving their property to a man they actually had feelings for. But that changed in 1870 when England passed the Married Women's Property Acts, which allowed women to keep money they earned and inherit property. Even this late in history, though, marriages were still most often arranged, but they began to be preceded by a period of wooing called courtship, owing to a woman's greater freedom to choose a man. Great Britain introduced civil marriage, or sometimes called non-religious marriage, with the Marriage Act of 1836. The departure here being that civil marriage was not necessarily undertaken to pursue God's divine agenda for marriage, so it didn't have to involve the church. Civil marriage was to establish a societal custom by which families could be formed, because they created the backbone of societies and thriving communities. By the 19th century, in the Victorian era, love match marriages became the common aspiration. It may seem like love and marriage have always been together like a horse and carriage, but actually, love match marriages are a very new thing. Marriage's primary purpose was to bind women to men, and thus guarantee that a man's children were truly his biological heirs. By 1929, all U.S. states had laws on marriage licenses. Marriage became a federal issue with the introduction of the married couple income tax filing in 1913. Enter the automobile in the 1920s, and courtship became dating. No longer were couples tied to the parlor to get to know each other. Also, the automobile giving access to a wider geography broadened the field of potential mates. Proximity of a prospect was not as much a factor. Up to and during the 1950s, being a housewife was a heralded position for women, and women enjoyed the challenge of creating the perfect home. A term was coined for this trend called the cult of domesticity. Entertainment and advertising was full of wives and mothers being wives and mothers, and this avocation was considered a high calling which commanded great societal respect. It is interesting that the opposite is true today, and here is where the change began. Due to wars and industrialization, women began getting a taste of working outside the home and started feeling less satisfied being limited to homemaking. Around the 1960s, the rise of feminism added fuel to the burning fires of discontent growing in women toward their limitations and careers to homemaking, and their not receiving equal pay for equal work outside the home. Society tended to lean toward assisting men in becoming breadwinners while marginally accepting that women could participate in contributing to the earning capacity of the family with a job or career. As women began moving out of the home into the workplace and halls of power, the family underwent great change, creating what was called latchkey kids, where parents became less involved in child rearing, and children were being raised in daycare centers instead of by parents. The tug-of-war continues between men and women, and husbands and wives as to what roles each should fill to create the best homes and the best communities. Women now reject the notion that women should be subservient to their husbands in any way, and they reject the scriptural notion of the husband being the head of the wife in the family. Today, many women face a crisis of conscience in rejecting this scriptural norm, and a battle of ostracism when they accept it and live in opposition to the new cultural norms. Further, there is a movement afoot for women to live completely independent of men. Some call it the "I don't need no man" revolution. Today, marriage, family, and the divine purposes of each are under attack and being redefined, separated from any notion that God's intentions matter. Marriage and family are largely seen as civil institutions with no connection to a creator, therefore open to rethinking and redesign. For example, same-sex couples have created a new kind of marriage and even adopt children to create a new kind of home. But we Christians still look to ancient purposes from the Ancient of Days to govern why, how, and when we marry. But what about the wedding ceremony itself, given God did not tell us how that ritual should be carried out? As mentioned before, God gives us spiritual discernment to know how to establish traditions, practices, and rituals that embody His spiritual principles and honor Him as our Creator and loving Father. God does not want the meaning of marriage lost, and to the extent that the wedding ceremony embodies and communicates that meaning, it is good. Although there are many different and interesting wedding customs around the world, there are many cross-cultural similarities as well. For example, many wedding traditions are replete with symbols of fertility, good health, good luck, or beginning a new life. Here are a few interesting customs. In Greek weddings, the bride might carry a lump of sugar to symbolize the sweet life, or a sprig of ivy to symbolize endless love. In Norway, friends of the couple plant palm trees on both sides of the front door of the couple's home to symbolize fertility. In South Africa, the parents of the bride and groom carry fire from their homes to the fireplace of the newlyweds' home as a symbol of their leaving the parents' home and beginning a new life together warmed by love. In some American weddings, the couple uses individual candles that each holds to light a single candle in the middle and then blow out their own candles to express the end of duality and birth of oneness. There are clearly Christian principles built into this ritual. And finally, there are the wedding vows. Discerning Christian leaders have written many different formal wedding vows to pick from, all attempting to embody the covenant agreement expected by God. The most famous ones were created in 1549 by priest Thomas Cranmer, who wrote the first official book of wedding vows, the Book of Common Prayer. His lines have endured since then and are used in a large number of religious and non-religious weddings. Here is one of Cranmer's most iconic vows, which I am sure you will recognize. I, Mary, take thee, George, to be my lawful wedded husband, or wife when the man speaks, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and to obey, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance. By the way, the phrase, to obey, is almost always removed with prejudice today, owing to women becoming unwilling to recognize or adhere to the scriptural idea of the man being the head of the wife. In Jewish wedding ceremonies, vows are recited only when the rings are exchanged and the groom says, "Behold, thou art consecrated unto me with this ring according to the law of Moses and of Israel." Then the groom places the ring on the bride's finger. If the wedding is a double ring ceremony, the bride recites the same words. The phrase, "I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine," is often recited in Hebrew as well, a verse from the Song of Solomon, or sometimes called the Song of Songs. Marriage ceremonies and marriage licenses are wonderfully practical legal and cultural rituals that both provide a solemn occasion for couples to publicly commit to a divine covenant with God before witnesses, and encouraging legal, community, and family support and protection for the couple. The wedding also helps remind the couple of the sacred nature of what they are entering into and the expectations of the state that the sworn vows of the marriage be carried out. Civil-only marriages are between the couple and the state, and that is why so many of these marriages take on a less sacred and more showy mood. From all of this, you can see that God has no specific expectations for the wedding ceremony, but He has blessed clear-thinking people over the years to establish traditional practices and vows that give the wedding a sense of its divine purpose. And it is from those practices that most Christians plan their weddings. Civil weddings have an anything-goes approach, however. Sometimes they do adopt the Christian model for its beauty and dignity. Therefore, young lovers, there is no right or wrong here, but there is appropriate and inappropriate as defined by your idea of the meaning of marriage. And of course, culture always plays a role. We hope you find this brief history of marriage thought-provoking, and mostly we hope it brings clarity of purpose to the ceremony you are planning. We like the idea of using traditional vows, like the example above, because years of thought and reflection went into creating a covenant statement that embodies God's purposes, while also creating congruence with the civil laws related to marriage. But you do have license to be creative yet tasteful as well, and we are sure you would do that anyway because we know you both. With great expectations, your familial board.